The following is distributed by the Berean Call.
Chapter 13, Signs of Hope. Some Muslims have expressed surprise and anger that Islam is linked with terrorism. Such a state of denial is not helpful. Thankfully, however, there are signs of a growing embarrassment over the continuing murder of innocent people by Muslims. Imams across England have been urged by the Muslim Council of Britain to change this image. They are asking Friday worshippers to cooperate with police in their anti-terror investigations and efforts. In 2004, the Turkish government ordered the mosques in that nation to deliver an anti-terrorism message as authorities pieced together evidence to determine who was behind a string of suicide bombings, a trademark of Islam, that killed 57 people and wounded hundreds more. There is a growing movement within mosques in the United States to remind worshippers that Islam does not condone unlawful acts. That terminology, however, could be misleading. In the Muslim mind, Islamic terrorists are obeying Allah, Muhammad, and the Quran, and thus are not lawbreakers. That they are murderers of innocent women and children according to man's laws is of no concern. They are not looked upon as lawbreakers, but admired as heroic martyrs in Islam's jihad against the world of unbelievers. There are, however, serious conflicts of opinion when the terrorism is by one faction of Islam against another faction. Surprising to most Westerners who imagine that non-Muslims are the only targets of Islamic terrorism is the fact that most terrorist acts are by Muslims against Muslims. We have seen that scenario being played out in Iraq, where by far the greatest number of terrorist victims are not coalition troops, but Muslim civilians. News from Iraq is reported worldwide, but the many terrorist bombings in other Muslim countries are largely unheard of in the West. Consider one example out of many that could be given. The October 1, 2004 suicide bombing during Friday prayers at the Masjid Zanabiya Shiite Mosque in Sialkot, eastern Pakistan. About 30 worshippers were killed and more than 100 wounded. The victims are looked upon by Shiites as shaheeds, martyrs in jihad, assured of immediate entrance into paradise. Yet the suicide bomber, a Sunni Muslim, imagined that by killing them, he would gain instant entrance to paradise for himself. Of course, the Shiite clerics said he went directly to hell. Who is right? This is a serious question. Terrorism and mosques. The fact cannot be denied that many mosques are training and support centers for terrorists. In some of them, even in the West, terrorism is openly preached, as it is in every mosque in Muslim countries. We have already seen that this is not extremism, but true Islam as Muhammad established it, and as his successors practiced it for centuries, all the way from France to China. Today, terrorism is a worldwide phenomenon perpetrated in the name of Allah to advance by intimidation the cause of Islam, or a particular brand of it, depending upon the Islamic faction involved. Of course, all Muslims of every faction are united in their hatred of Israel and the West. On September 30, 2003, the Israeli army captured Hamas propaganda materials at Al-Ain Mosque in Al-Baray. The material included posters commemorating shaheeds who were suicide bombers attacking Israel. Other material was dedicated to terrorists held in custody. Laudatory posters were also found proclaiming the bravery and virtue of those who carried out suicide bombing attacks on September 9, 2003, near the cities of Ramla and Jerusalem and elsewhere. In the mosque were also militant Islamic manifestos attacking Israel, the Jewish people, the United States, and the entire Western world. Remember the statement issued on September 11, 2001 in Al Hayat al-Jadida, the official PA newspaper. Suicide bombers of today are the salt of the earth, the noblest people among us. How does this daily reality throughout so much of the world relate to the new image Islam is trying to create in the West? The IDF found a Hamas operative rolled up in a prayer rug in the Abd al-Nasser Mosque in Ramallah. Ahmad Odeh, another wanted Hamas terrorist, was discovered hiding in the Zaid Mosque near the entrance to the city of Tulkarm on the West Bank. He shot at Israeli troops who returned fire and killed him. Nor is the relationship of mosques to terrorism confined to the East. Many mosques in the West, including some in America, have been associated with terrorist cells. In February of 2004, Representative Peter King, Republican of New York, a member of the House Select Committee on Homeland Security, claimed that 85% of mosques have extremist leadership and that no Muslims are cooperating with law enforcement in the war on terror. The FBI's raid of the Masjid as-Salam House of Peace in Albany, New York, in August 2004, has led to indictments against the mosque's imam and another member caught in a government sting on charges of money laundering and promoting terrorism. These are but a few of the examples among many. Unfortunately, the mistake continues to be made of calling true Muslims extremist. Was Muhammad an extremist? That would be absurd. How can the founder of Islam be an extremist? Surely of all Muslims, he would be the exemplification of true Islam if ever there was one. Yet Muhammad plundered and murdered in the name of Allah to the glory of Islam. This refusal by the Western leaders to face the truth that Islam itself is the enemy is costing us dearly. Yet, at the same time, there are hopeful signs that opinions are changing. A religion of death. Fallujah, Iraq's holy city of more than 100 mosques and the largest Sunni city west of Baghdad, sheltered so many terrorists acting for Islam and to the glory of Allah, and was such a center from which terrorist attacks were launched that the U.S. and Iraqi military had to take the city house by house. In the process, they captured or killed hundreds of terrorists. The military operation netted at least 15 portable surface-to-air missiles capable of shooting down aircraft, dozens of mortar tubes, and sophisticated anti-tank weapons among hundreds of weapons caches, many of them in mosques. 1 out of every 2 mosques in Fallujah was used for hiding fighters and/or weapons. This practice is only to be expected in Islam because it recognizes no distinction between religion and state. The place of one's burial is extremely important to a Muslim's hope for the next life. Najaf, another of Iraq's holy cities, this one Shiite, has a booming business entirely devoted to corpses. Here is located the tomb of Ali, cousin and son-in-law of Muhammad. His murder by rival Sunni Muslims near Kufa some 1,300 years ago gave birth to the Shiite movement. Near Ali's mausoleum is the largest graveyard in the world, with more than 1.8 million tombs. Why so many? Amir Tahiri, editor of a Muslim publication, explains. For the world's 150 million Muslim Shias, Najaf is the ideal burial place. Proximity to Ali is supposed to improve chances of avoiding Gehenna, the abode of the fallen, according to the Quran. Improved chances? What assurance is that? Believers spend a lifetime savings to have their corpses transported to Najaf for burial close to Ali's mausoleum. 5 generations of my family are buried there, thanks to a tradition that began in the 17th century. What does this have to do with justice and truth? It sounds like Catholicism. Death is at the center of life here. Tens of thousands of grave diggers, undertakers, masters of funeral ceremonies, tomb watchers, givers of prayers for the dead, intercessors, Quran reciters, mediums for communication with the departed, and so on, make up the bulk of the workforce. While Najaf's chief import is corpses, its major export is mullahs. The city hosts the most eminent of Shia seminaries, which at the height of its theological boom in the 1950s boasted 124 madrasas with 40,000 trainee mullahs. All the grand ayatollahs of the past 150 years studied or taught there. Muhammad's son-in-law Ali is to the Shiite what Catholic saints are to their devotees. However, neither praying to a Catholic saint nor being buried near Ali's remains will ever pay the penalty for sin. Not even earthly justice, and surely not God's, works that way. Certainly, being buried in the same tomb with Ali would not help. Muslims are all being deceived. How can the true God remain just and holy and yet forgive sins? This is the issue. And right here, we encounter a major difference between the Quran and the Bible, between Islam and Christianity that cannot be swept under the rug of wishful ecumenism. Islam really offers no hope that satisfies the conscience concerning God's justice. The penalty for sin must be paid, and that certainly can't be done by being buried near Ali, dying in jihad, or offering good deeds to counterbalance evil. The question is how a just God could forgive sinners. Inspired of the Holy Spirit, Paul declared, "But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God, by faith of Jesus Christ unto them that believe. For there is no difference. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, being justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, for the remission of sins that are past, through the forbearance of God, that He might be just, and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus." Here, as elsewhere, the Bible declares that Christ paid the penalty for our sins and that we merely need to accept His payment in our place. If that is true, the conscience has legitimate basis for peace. And if not true, then we must spend eternity paying that penalty ourselves in hell. There is no other alternative. The jihad martyr, however, believes that his blood pays for his sins, even though in his death he sent others to hell. His shattered remains are not washed or dressed, but buried just as he died. His blood will thus presumably testify to Allah that he is worthy of entering paradise because he sacrificed his life to kill others. Every conscience is repelled by such perversion. Israel does not return the mutilated bodies to their Muslim families because that would give occasion for parading the remains and arousing even more fanaticism at the funeral. Israel, however, claims that it gives each of them a genuine Muslim burial. Supposed ways to paradise. Islam has one thing in common with every other religion, which separates them all from true Christianity: attempting to appease God with works and sacrifices. And for a Muslim, that even includes giving up one's own life to gain paradise. Whatever happens, it is up to the individual Muslim to live a good enough life and to make amends for any misdeeds in order to be acceptable to Allah. But Allah changes His mind and decides to send some to hell regardless of what they may think or do. Of all terrorists, suicide bombers are the most difficult to detect and stop. There are literally millions of young men and boys in training in Iraq, Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other Muslim countries to become suicide bombers. They haven't heard the latest propaganda in the West that terrorism is un-Islamic and that suicide bombers are giving Islam a bad name. In Iran alone, as already noted, in just one appeal, 40,000 were signed up for suicide missions in Iraq, where thousands of foreign fighters have infiltrated to confront the coalition and Iraqi troops. For many, this is a lifetime ambition. The greater the number of innocent people the bomber kills, the greater the reward from Allah. The families of a successful shaheed, that is, who kills others in his suicide, will receive a large monetary reward, once paid by Saddam Hussein, but now by the Saudi royal family, and from contributions collected from Saudi citizens. The shaheed is promised instant entrance into paradise, where the rivers run with wine, forbidden to the Muslim in this life. The tables are laden with every delicacy the palate could desire, and at least 72 and perhaps hundreds or even thousands of dark-eyed houris await his pleasure. He is promised the appetite and strength of 100 men for food, drink, and sex. The Muslim heaven is hedonistic and sensual, gratifying base desires rather than enjoying the love, fellowship, and wonder of God. Indeed, Allah, the Muslim God, is unknowable and not to be loved. For most Muslims, martyrdom is the best hope for reaching paradise. But paradise is not sure even then. Abu Bakr, Muhammad's first successor, received from Muhammad his personal promise of paradise without martyrdom. Yet we quote him in chapter 7, declaring that he feared that he might be the first one to enter hellfire. He was afraid that even if he had one foot inside paradise, Allah might shove him out. Can a suicide bomber then really be certain of his destiny when Abu Bakr was not? And on whose authority if Abu Bakr had doubts in spite of Muhammad's promise? The disastrous fact is that the first thing the jihad martyr discovers after his suicide is that he is not in heaven but in hell, as his own conscience must have told him, and that instead of being rewarded, he is being punished for the death and destruction he caused in this final act of his life. What a tragedy that so many are being deceived in this way. What God rewards murderers with heaven? The conscience God has given each person cries out in protest. Those under this immoral delusion are victims as well as those they murder. The fact that the United Nations, world leaders, and billions of citizens around the world do not rise up in outrage against this barbaric practice is as clear an indictment of the world of our day as was the thunderous silence in the face of the Holocaust in Nazi times. Justice must be satisfied. Let us think clearly for a moment. How can anyone's sins committed over a lifetime be expunged by one final good deed, much less by the sin of mass murder? What court of law would accept that? The murderer would, in fact, be punished for this additional crime. And imagine the hundreds of thousands of trusting Muslims whose surviving relatives paid dearly to have them buried as close to Ali's tomb as possible, under the hope that they will thereby gain some greater measure of mercy from Allah. Amir Tahiri is an intelligent man. Can he really believe that his family's sins have been forgiven because of their being buried in the vicinity of Ali's remains? What justice is that? Nor is this the only deadly delusion that grips Muslims. We have noted that only by killing every Jew on earth can Muslims bring to pass the last day. And what is that day's significance? That is when one's deeds will supposedly be weighed by Allah in the balance, and if the good outweighs the bad, then one is admitted to paradise without being a jihad martyr. Every conscience rejects such reasoning. What judge would excuse the guilty party from paying a speeding ticket who pleads that he or she had driven more within the speed limit than exceeding it? Or what judge would declare innocent a man who had committed one murder because he had once saved the lives of 2, or even a dozen people from drowning or from a burning building? To the person who promises never to break the law again if the judge will let him off this time, the judge would surely reply, "If you never break the law again, you are only doing what the law requires. You don't get extra credit for keeping the law in the future with which to pay the penalty for past sins." The human race, individually and collectively, is guilty of rebellion against God. Living by its own rules and for its own ends, mankind is collectively defying the Creator of the universe. That rebellion will not go unpunished. God pronounced eternal death, that is, separation from Him in conscious pain and remorse, as the penalty for breaking His law in even the smallest way. In fact, there is no small breach of the law. To break the law in any respect is rebellion against God. That mankind would act selfishly rather than for God was inevitable. Obviously, then, God needed to have a means of forgiving and restoring man. But to forgive man without the penalty being paid would mean that God condoned evil and was even a partner in sin. The penalty must be paid in full. Conscience teaches every man that it is wrong to lie, steal, murder, commit adultery, to fornicate, to covet what belongs to someone else, to be proud, self-serving, and so on. Everyone also knows that justice demands a penalty for breaking God's laws. We can't buy God off. He doesn't negotiate or offer a special deal to anyone. His perfect, holy justice must be satisfied. The penalty must be paid. Yet God loves every person deeply enough to find a way to forgive man righteously. The only way was for God Himself to come to this earth as a man and pay that penalty for the entire human race, which, according to the Bible, He did in Jesus Christ. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not His Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through Him might be saved. He that believeth on the Son hath everlasting life, and he that believeth not the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abideth in him. This is the message of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, the promise of the Messiah by God's prophets. If this is not true, in fact, we can prove that it is, then there is no hope. Buddha certainly didn't provide a way for anyone to be forgiven by God, in whom he didn't even believe. Nor did Muhammad or any other religious leader. Nor is any rational hope of just forgiveness from God found in the Quran or the scriptures of any other religion. It is the Hebrew prophets alone who infallibly foretold Israel's future, and who also prophesied the coming of the Messiah with enough details to identify him beyond question. As we have already noted, the great Hebrew prophet Isaiah declared concerning the Messiah, whose coming and rejection by his own people he foretold. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. True Christianity simply believes and teaches that the Messiah, promised by the prophets to Israel and through her to the world, did indeed come to earth in the manner and precise time foretold, was rejected by the Roman authorities, the Jewish religious hierarchy, and his own people, was crucified for the sins of the world, and was resurrected the third day as the prophets declared and as history records. History verifies the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ? Of course it does. Even the resurrection? Can any educated person today believe that? The evidence is overwhelming. Lord Lyndhurst, one of the greatest legal minds in British history, declared, "I know pretty well what evidence is, and I tell you such evidence as that for the resurrection has never broken down yet." Simon Greenleaf, co-founder of Harvard's Graduate School of Law, as an agnostic, came to the same conclusion after careful examination and became a fervent Christian. He wrote a book, The Testimony of the Evangelist, addressed to his colleagues in the legal profession, challenging them to face the evidence. Sir Robert Anderson, head of the Criminal Investigation Division of Scotland Yard, added his testimony to the truth of the resurrection, as did many eminent scientist and historian, too numerous to quote here. Professor Thomas Arnold, who held the chair of modern history at Oxford University, wrote, "I have been used for many years to study the histories of other times, and to examine and weigh the evidence of those who have written about them. And I know of no one fact in the history of mankind which is proved by better and fuller evidence of every sort to the understanding of a fair inquirer than the great sign which God hath given us, that Christ died and rose again from the dead." Many a sincere person has been swept into skepticism and even atheism by the contemptuous declarations of liberal clergy or university professors, delivered with the finality of superior wisdom, that no intelligent, educated person any longer believes in the miracles in the Bible, much less in the resurrection. Nothing could be further from the truth. However, this is not the forum to pursue the overwhelming proofs any further. True Christianity, then, is separated from every religion in the world by an impassable gulf, and the difference rings true to the conscience. All religions propose that man do good works, engage in ritual, make sacrifices, or do something to somehow appease God. The Bible teaches that it is a matter of justice, not of appeasement. The penalty must be paid in full. God's justice and the penalty for breaking His law are infinite, because God is infinite, and thus God is the only one who can pay it, which He did by becoming a man in Christ. All anyone can do is accept the substitutionary death of Christ in His enduring the full penalty for the sins of all mankind, and thereby be forgiven. This is good news that every Christian is obliged to share with the world, persuasively, in love and reason, and without being dissuaded from doing so by threats or force. Intimidation of Christians by Muslims. What a tragedy that the Muslim knows nothing of the assurance of sins forgiven, and that tragedy is exacerbated by the reluctance of Christians to tell that good news to Muslims for fear of retaliation. Mark A. Gabriel, a pseudonym for obvious reasons, was a staunch Muslim and professor of Islamic history at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, the most authoritative center of Islamic thought in the world. Here is part of his story. I could see Christians wherever I went in my country, but not one Christian person tried to talk to me about his Jesus Christ, except the wonderful pharmacist who gave me the Bible. Fundamentalists tried to burn down her pharmacy, and she ultimately left Egypt and went to Canada. Christians living in Egypt are persecuted by the Muslim fundamentalist groups, so they have decided to live quietly and to distance themselves as much as possible from the more than 50 million Muslims living in the country who need to hear about Jesus Christ. This Christian society lives under great fear, and they actually refuse to witness to Muslims. I was required to spend 1 year in the Egyptian military. I shared a room with one other soldier who happened to be a Christian. I questioned him constantly about his faith. I asked him how he could believe in the Trinity, how he could believe that God has a son. Does God have a wife? I mocked. All these concepts were blasphemous according to Islam. Whenever I questioned him, he refused to answer. He would say to me, "Let us just be friends. Leave religion to God, please." He was very fearful of me and of the Muslims in our military group. This was one of the most difficult years in his life. After I met the Lord Jesus Christ, I remembered this man, sorry for how he allowed the spirit of fear to control his life, and how he refused to share the true Jesus Christ with others. When I went back to the Christian pharmacist who had given me the Bible and declared my faith in Jesus Christ, she arranged to go with me to meet the leader of an Egyptian church. She hoped this man would baptize me and help me in biblical study and receive me as a new member. We sat down together in his office, and he basically told me, "My son, you can go back to your home. We do not need to add a number to our congregation. And if you go home, we will not lose any number of our congregation. We are not interested." Later, he told my pharmacist friend that he didn't want other Muslims to hear that he had opened up his church to a former Muslim, because he was afraid they would come and burn down the building. Yet Christ commanded his early disciples, and every Christian today is included, to go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Millions of Muslims have come to the West, so we cannot excuse ourselves by saying that we aren't able to go to them. They have come to us. True Christians must, in love and compassion and without fear, share the good news of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ with Muslims and Jews, and with the whole world. The greatest challenge we face is how to bring this message of God's love not only to Muslims in the West, but to those remaining in their own countries. This author has prayed for many years that the Islamic curtain, which is more impenetrable than the iron or bamboo curtains ever were, could somehow be brought down. The Muslim world desperately needs to hear the good news of salvation through Christ's payment for their sins. They need to have the opportunity to make a free choice without intimidation. For that to become possible, some major changes would have to take place. At this time, even to question Islam or to consider alternate beliefs, much less to turn away from Islam to another religion, would bring persecution and even death. This is the frightening situation even for those living in Muslim communities within the Western world. The long arm of zealous enforcers can reach anywhere. Some hopeful signs. One indication that events are moving in a better direction has been a new willingness on the part of university students, usually nearly unanimous in their opposition to Israel, to pay attention to speakers critical of Islam. For example, on the evening of May 11, 2005, students crowded Montezuma Hall at San Diego University after standing in long lines to endure security searches to hear Walid Shobat criticize the PLO and to speak out in support of Israel. Not long ago, such a meeting would have been protested to such an extent that hardly anyone would have attended, which may still be the case at many American universities. Shobat, not his real name, writes and lectures against the PLO, an organization he once served as a terrorist. He has written a book titled Why I Left Jihad. Security was heavy. There was a minimum of heckling, but lively challenges from opponents during the question time. One young woman who said that her family also came from Bethlehem disputed Shobat's claim that the Holocaust is denied in Palestinian schools. She subsided in embarrassment, however, when Shobat challenged her claim that she had never heard of Palestinians killing innocent Palestinian civilians in PLO territory. Are you saying that Palestinians lynching civilians in the streets of Ramallah or Bethlehem is not true? Shobat exclaimed. I've never seen that before, she responded. Shobat replied, I'm flabbergasted that you say you have never seen anything of that sort. This is exactly how I used to be. I denied the Holocaust ever existed. Encouraging, too, is the evident awakening on the part of some Western leaders and certain segments of the media to the truth about Islam. And what is most important, the courage to express it. For months after 9/11, the lie that Islam is peace was sounded by almost every public voice in the West. Honesty, however, cannot forever turn a blind eye to the truth. Eventually, the realization can no longer be stifled that those responsible for the vast majority of terrorism in the world today, and it is spreading like a virus, are devout Muslims, and that the terrorism they inflict upon the world is for the purpose of spreading Islam by bringing all mankind into submission to Allah and Muhammad as his prophet. Consequently, there has been a growing boldness not only to speak out against terror, but also to expose its connection to Islam itself. One of the leaders in this new honesty, as we have noted, has been Mortimer B. Zuckerman, editor-in-chief of U.S. News and World Report. In mid-2004, in an editorial titled Looking Evil Right in the Eye, he wrote, The grotesque cruelties leave no doubt about the enemy we're up against. News of their horrific abductions and beheadings fly around the globe on technologies in their twisted minds invented by the infidel. The masked cowards pose with their helpless captives while presenting demands they know cannot and will not be met. Their purpose is manipulation, to increase the pain of the victim's family and friends, to force Western governments to moderate their opposition to the terrorist networks, to panic foreigners into leaving Muslim lands. We are in their way as these misguided men seek to restore a new unified Muslim ummah, that is, community, ruled by a new caliphate, governed by Islamic law and organized to wage jihad against the rest of the world. As for the Muslim world, which has bred this plague, it will have to decide who is the enemy. It can't have it both ways. The indulgence of deriding the West while tolerating the evil in their midst. It is outrageous that Saudi Arabia, home to 15 of the 19 September 11th murderers, has done virtually nothing to clean up its colleges of intolerance. We must persuade the Muslim regimes to condemn this new barbarism before it consumes them too. A new self-criticism among Muslims. There are hopeful signs within the Muslim community as well. A growing number not only of intellectuals but also of Islamic clergy are expressing increasing embarrassment and displeasure at the deeds of those they refer to as Islamic extremists. By their definition, however, as we have documented, Islam's founding prophet, Muhammad himself, would have to be labeled an extremist and even a terrorist. So would most of his followers over the past 1,300 years. But we needn't press Muslim leaders to admit the obvious. That admission will come with time, and with it, we can hope and pray a new willingness to engage in open discussion without the sword of Islam poised over the necks of those who may decide on the basis of the facts to leave this destructive religion for a new life. There has been an attempt to root out extremist ideas from some Muslim public schools. On September 5, 2004, Crown Prince Abdullah bin Abd al-Aziz told senior education officials, "Watch your teachers. We want to serve the religion and the homeland, not terrorism." Saudi Education Minister Mohammed Ahmad al-Rashid said the education minister will in no way accept a teacher who holds misguided views that influence the younger generation, and that any element implementing an extremist policy will be uprooted from the education system. There's the misnomer extremist again, betraying the unwillingness to admit the horrible truth. Tabuk District Governor Prince Fahd bin Sultan said in a September 12, 2004 speech to members of the Tabuk Educational Council, "It is unacceptable for one of us to disseminate extremism, fanaticism, terrorism, and apostasy. We must not allow anyone who identifies with the group holding a dangerous and deviant view to remain among us." The Mecca Education Administration organized information campaigns in all the city's schools with the aim of increasing awareness regarding the danger of terrorism and the extremist view, and for encouraging the middle path in Islam. Although there is still an unwillingness to admit the truth about Islam, which is being swept under the rug of extremism, at least some steps, no matter how small and groping, are being made in the right direction. For these, the world can be thankful. The fact that democratic elections have been carried out in Iraq for the first time in its history, despite fierce terrorist attempts to prevent anyone from going to the polls, it is a very encouraging sign. Bush pulled it off, confounding the multitude of doomsayers. In the process, terrorism in its ugliest and most brutal form revealed itself as the enemy of freedom. The opposition of Islam itself to peace and justice is being exposed. Eyes are opening to the naked truth. Hopeful changes must follow. An awakening in the Muslim world? Some of the lies that have been used to justify suicide bombings are being exposed by Muslim leaders themselves, who oppose such tactics. One of the first to speak out was Hamza Yusuf, who declared that the obligation of opposing terrorists falls upon Muslims to root them out, and I think it is a jihad now for the Muslims in the Muslim countries to rid themselves of this element. Several Arab columnists have recently published articles critical of the common excuse that the main motivation behind terrorism is poverty or despair. They instead cite the role of cultural and religious factors in motivating terrorism, and particularly the incitement by sheikhs who encourage young men to conduct terror operations. For years, and not only in Palestinian territory, but throughout the Muslim world, to be a suicide bomber has been held up to millions of Muslim youths from their earliest childhood as the loftiest ideal. That scam is now being openly and widely challenged in the Islamic world itself, with new courage and vigor. For example, Saudi columnist Mohammed Mahfouz courageously wrote recently in the Saudi Gazette, "The phenomenon of terrorism and violence we are facing is carried out by a group of brainwashed youth influenced by glamorous slogans. In my opinion, any delay in fighting this ideological cultural battle against terrorism will drag our country into the abyss of instability. Our determination will pave the way for successfully dismantling the ideological and cultural structure that offers fertile ground for the proliferation of this phenomenon." Mohammed Sayed Tantawi, the Grand Sheikh of the Al-Azhar Mosque of Cairo, recognized as the highest authority in Sunni Islam, declared at a conference in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, that extremist Islamic groups had appropriated Islam and its notion of jihad or holy struggle for their own ends. Islamic scholar Dr. Muqtadar Khan, in a scathing open letter dated February 12, 2003, addressed to Osama bin Laden, boldly declared, "I would rather live in America under Ashcroft and Bush at their worst than in any Islamic state established by ignorant, intolerant, and murderous punks like you and Mullah Omar at their best." Another prominent Islamic scholar, Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, openly condemned al-Qaeda for killing innocent civilians and for their bombing of a centuries-old Jewish synagogue on the Tunisian island of Jerba in April 2002. Riding the crest of this new wave, United Arab Emirates writer Abdallah Rashid in the Al-Ittihad Daily wrote, "The socio-economic situation of most of the terrorists who participate in the criminal operations around the world is very good. Interrogations by the Iraqi authorities of terrorists arrested during raids and searches revealed that most of the Saudi youth and some of the youth from the Gulf who went to Iraq to join the al-Qaeda terrorist groups come from families that are not poor and from a social environment that does not suffer from economic problems. The reason for the involvement of the Arab Muslim youth in such criminal and despicable acts is the terrifying brainwashing at the hands of religious clerics who nourish the Muslim youth with hostility, hatred, and resentment towards members of other divine religions. They incite others to fight the atheist and Christian infidels, as they put it, while not one of them volunteers to go himself as a model and an example to others. Yet all of Christ's disciples, except Judas and possibly John, died as martyrs. Another Saudi columnist, Abdullah Nasser al-Fawzan, pointed out the same hypocrisy of these rabble-rousing imams in the Saudi daily Al-Watan, with the perceptive and embarrassing title, "Why don't the sheikhs who encourage the youth to fight jihad do so themselves?" He appealed to the youths who were aspiring to martyrdom in jihad to think carefully for themselves. Quote, "If there is a worthy deed that endangers one's life but guarantees paradise like jihad for the sake of Allah, are we to suppose that young teenagers in the early stages of life should aspire to carry it out? Or should it rather be the elderly nearing death to aspire to end their lives through an honorable deed that will guarantee them paradise? A youth traveled to another country in order to kill a man accused of atheism, in order to get closer to Allah and thus reach paradise. Fate had it that the intended victim was the first one to meet the youth in a cafe and welcomed him. They had a friendly talk and got to like one another. When the youth mentioned him by name, the man was startled and asked, 'Why are you inquiring about this man?' The youth said that the man was an evil atheist, and he intended to kill him to get closer to Allah and reach paradise. Amazed, the man asked the youth, 'How are you so certain that this man is an atheist, deserving of death, and that killing him will bring you to paradise?' The youth responded, 'Some sheikhs told me so.' The man said, 'Why don't these sheikhs aspire to reach paradise themselves? And why are they giving up for your sake carrying out this honorable deed which brings one to paradise?' The youth was embarrassed and said, 'I don't know.' Today, the same question that the man asked the paradise-seeking youth could be addressed to the youth who blow themselves up in order to reach paradise. Influenced by the fatwas and instructions of men who have gained their trust, these people who hold sway over the minds of the youth have deceived them into thinking that what they are doing is an act of jihad that will bring them to paradise. O youth who seeks paradise, where are your sheikhs when it comes to this honorable deed? Why are your sheikhs shirking jihad and not participating in your honorable mission? Recent developments are encouraging. Such articles as these being published in popular magazines and newspapers in Muslim countries are bound to have an effect. And as Muslims begin to rethink some of the dogma they have been taught in the mosques and public schools, perhaps they will also begin to question why converts must be threatened with death in order to force them into Islam, and why that same threat of death is necessary to prevent a mass exodus from this religion, and why any religion should be violent at all. If there is the possibility of thinking for oneself, simple logic would denounce a religion that kills in order to maintain itself. And any God who rewards murderers with paradise ought to be renounced. A recent report in U.S. News and World Report revealed that public opinion is heading in the right direction within the Muslim world. It was based upon a 2005 Pew Global Attitudes Project survey of opinion in 6 Muslim countries, which indicated that minds are being changed and in the right direction. Support for terrorism in defense of Islam has declined dramatically. In Muslim countries except in Jordan, which has a Palestinian majority, and Turkey, where support has remained a low 14%. It has fallen in Indonesia from 27 to 15% since 2002, Pakistan from 41 to 25% since 2004, Morocco from 40 to 13% since 2004, and among Muslims in Lebanon from 73 to 26% since 2002. Similarly, when asked whether democracy was a Western way of doing things or could work well in their own country, between 77 and 83% in Lebanon, Morocco, Jordan, and Indonesia say it could work in their country. In each case, a significant increase. Egypt will have its first contested election for president this year. Most conversations over meals, tea, coffee, and dessert are about a small but active opposition movement in Egypt that since December has focused on ending the dictatorship of President Hosni Mubarak. Minds are indeed changing. 2 generations ago, Americans, at the cost of hundreds of thousands of deaths, changed minds in Germany and Japan. The Pew Global Attitudes metrics give us reason to believe that today's Americans, at far lower cost, are once again changing minds in the Muslim world. What will it be? An escalation of a centuries-long hatred that could engulf the world in flames? Or will it be sincere submission, jihad redefined in truly peaceful terms, to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? If the latter, he will embrace all mankind in a relationship of justice and peace. Please visit our website, thebereancall.org, to access our radio archives going back to 1999 and our newsletter going back to 1986. We offer daily updates by email or visit us on Facebook or Twitter. Are you looking for information about a specific topic? Go to thebereancall.org and click on Topics at the top of the page. Our online store is thebereancall.com. We offer a wide variety of books, tracts, CDs, and DVDs. Note that most of our ebooks are free. I'm Gary Carmichael. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you can join us again next week. Until then, we encourage you to search the Scriptures 24/7.
Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back.